right, and welcome everybody to another edition of the most important edition. What are we, a newspaper now? Episode. I meant to say episode of the most important conversations. Man, I think sometimes I was, you know, maybe I was born in the 1920s or something, the morning edition, the afternoon edition, the daily edition. Anyway, what's going on, September? How's it going today?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Excited about this conversation here.
Mm,
I'm always coming to you with emotional sobriety conversations.
yeah.
That lesson is one that I really grapple with. It's one that I have to intentionally keep at the front of my mind. And it's very easy to let go of that lesson in the heat of the moment with various things. When somebody wants to almost run you off the road, you kind of lose touch with emotional sobriety. You want to just
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So that happened today.
Oh,
Yeah.
you almost
Yeah,
got ran off the road.
I totally did. But because I'm a professional race car driver, I was able to manipulate myself out of that scenario. But I thought, man, what a jerk. Like, what has to be going on in somebody's day to intentionally try to run you off the road because
Yeah.
they don't want to move over as the lane merges? What is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had worse than that, but I empathize.
Yes.
I've had worse than that. People, um, you know, driving with plates that aren't local and they just decide they don't like where you're driving from. So this happened to me. So they're following me and they literally try to run me off the road in a ditch. I'm like, I was doing nothing, just driving.
Just driving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
Right.
a little on the aggressive side when I drive. I'll be honest about that. I do have a heavy foot. I have a fun car that makes it very difficult to not have a heavy foot. So I know that I'm an aggressive driver.
I
And I'm
am
also
too.
a very safe driver as well. That when
Yeah.
I'm in that state, my senses are way heightened. And
Yeah.
I'm
Me
super
too.
aware of what's going on around me when I know that I'm driving that way, because it's not just my life on the road. There's other lives on the road. And
Yeah.
so you gotta be more aware of, and that's the thing, when my boys started learning to drive, my children are 25 and 21. So they've been driving for a while. And they know that I'm an aggressive driver. And and I knew that they would pick up the habits because I picked up those habits from my father. And the
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I would tell them is that if you drive this way, you have to learn to be super aware of what's going on around you at all times and be able to read the road. You got to
Yeah.
read the road, read people's behavior before it happens, and try to anticipate that. But people like that just try to run you off the road,
Mm.
it makes you wonder what the hell is going on in their day that they think it's a good idea to do something like that.
I know. Well, they're not thinking. That's part
No,
one. Part
they're
one.
wrapped up in their emotions,
Yeah, they're reacting. Yeah.
reacting.
Yeah.
Emotional sobriety.
Yeah.
On a show recently, we were talking about the victim mentality of society.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
God, it comes in all layers and colors and flavors these days, doesn't it?
Yeah. 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 The situation we find ourselves in is, I think it's happened many times, obviously, throughout human history. But we're in a time right now where, let me see where the best place to start with this sort of victim mentality situation. We have so many things intersecting right now that are unparalleled in human history, and they're all happening at the same time. It's a little bit like that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's kind of what it feels like these days, right? So we've got, the effects of exponentially transformative technology that we still don't even understand, like in terms of how to integrate it. What's that famous quote? I can't remember who said it, but we have 21st century technology and Bronze Age emotions. So we've got this technology that expands and extends the power and capacity of humanity, of what humans can do, whether you're talking about AI or you're talking about advances in and some, it's not all bad, incidentally. It's just transformative. But whether you're talking about AI, or you're talking about social media or the internet, or you're talking about um, exponential changes in mediated communication, like how we connect to one another, the ability for everyone to have a voice. There was a time in human history, um, going back about 100 or so years. It was a period called yellow journalism. And uh, during that time, the printing press technology, as technology gets less expensive, it becomes more egalitarian, more accessible to people. And the more that happens, people's personal power. I think on the call or the show you're referencing, we were talking about power. And so we have a situation where individuals have more power today on the individual level than we've ever had in human history. And that's unequivocally the truth. So this period of yellow journalism about 100 years ago, printing press technology got massively cheap. Therefore, more people who didn't have access to it in the past were able to publish. And so they were publishing little pamphlets and news sheets and things. It was like a cottage industry almost. Like anyone who could afford a printing press or could afford access to one could publish their own little thing. And so that allowed a lot of people who didn't have the facts or access to a broad enough body of information to kind of be more considerate with what they publish. They just publish their opinion, right? Everyone has an opinion, but we don't need more opinions, actually, right? What we need is thoughtful, informed viewpoints. But an opinion, I like this, I don't like that, like who cares, really, right? But that was happening. And so out of that was born the publishing industry. The publishing industry got born out of the yellow journalism thing because humanity came to, society, we came to a point and we said, this is crazy. We can't just have anyone publishing anything they want to everyone. Because, people, if they're uninformed, they're very gullible and they'll just believe what they want. Or we also know there's this thing in the psychological literature called confirmation bias. So if you already believe something, you're more likely to only look for that information, and it just reinforces your already held belief. Well, I mean, I could believe that the sky, is pink during the day. And someone will say, sometimes it's pink. Yes, but you know what I'm saying, right? It's normally blue on a 12 o'clock afternoon, no clouds in the sky. It's normally blue. I can believe that it's pink, and I could go find evidence that it's pink. But that doesn't change the facts on the ground. So anyway, the publishing industry came out of this, and it actually took away people's individual power, because now if you wanted quality artifacts, published artifacts, books and pamphlets and journals and things like that, there were gatekeepers. You had editors, you had people who read the thing and said, let's fact check this. Let's make sure this is true. Right. Yeah. And that's what happened. And then anyway, so fast forward, internet and social media, we're back to where we were, only it's exponentially bigger. Right? Because you don't need a clunky printing press. No. All you need is a laptop computer, and you're in business, or phone.
That's it. Yes.
Right. Yes. So anyway, more people have more power than they've ever had in their life. That sounds like a good thing, and it's not inherently totally bad. But here's the problem. We haven't handled this emotional sobriety thing yet, this ego thing that you're bringing up, where there is, where people have a lot of power, there's also a lot of responsibility that needs to come with that. And so we're missing the responsibility part right now as a society. And I think there's one little other thing I want to just throw in here, and then I'm curious about your thoughts. If I increase my power through now I can get my voice out there. Now I can remember, I think I defined power on our last episode that we had talked about this is the ability to assert one's will, right? So, okay, I have a phone, I have social media, I have the ability to put my voice out there. But then something happens. Nothing happens because everyone's doing the same thing. So, you have this cacophony of voices, everyone's chattering. And so on an individual level, most people's power is getting just lost in this noise. And so there's this weird effect that's going on. I feel like I should have the ability to assert my will, to influence my surroundings, to influence my friends, to get my opinion out there because I have this technology that allows me to do that. But I am not getting any feedback that's telling me my power is having any effect, in which case I'm still powerless. Now that leaves me feeling frustrated, right? And leads me feeling like a victim. Because a victim, as we talked about on the previous episode, a victim is someone who has no power. They have no power to assert their will. So what we have today are the optics that everyone has power because we all have access to this incredible technology. But because everyone, it's like when everyone's doing it, no one might as well be doing it. Like it just doesn't matter, right? There is this sort of point of diminishing returns that starts to happen where power mattered. Like if you go back to what I was saying earlier about the publishing industry, if you got through the gatekeepers and your book or your whatever was published and was mass printed and there was a real sense of power, you could exert your will and influence people because you were one of the select few who got through. Now, when everyone gets through, there's no power in that. I think of it as a metaphor, like the difference between a spotlight and a laser. So a laser is a very concentrated, finite beam of light that has a lot of power. It can cut things, it can burn things. A spotlight, on the other hand, is very wide and it's not it's not concentrated. It's just not as powerful, at least not in the same way, right? So we have everyone who feels like they should be powerful today, who wants to be powerful, but it's, they're not. And so that leads us to what you brought up, which is this victim mentality and this victim society that we find ourselves in. Because you're a victim if you can't exert the will. And if the definition of power is the ability to exert the will, then that's why we have a victim society.
Well, speaking of the power thing, then you have people running around. Why are you famous? Because I'm famous.
Yeah, I'm famous for being famous.
What is that? Also speaking about power as well on that topic and this victim mentality of this gender conversation that's been going on around right now as well. That because an individual believes that this gender is who they are, which is opposite of their biology, that because they believe it, that I also need to believe that for them as well. And I don't think that that's okay. I don't think that's okay at all. If you are biologically a male, but you feel more in tune with the feminine energy of you, that's great. Embrace that. Be who you are. But do not make me believe the same thing. I see you as a male. You are biologically a male. That's what you are. And and for me, it's up against the conversation of science. Like male and female, biological male, biological females, our brains are wired differently. We have different chemicals that run through our body. My chemicals are different than your chemicals because you're a biological male, I'm biological female. But the conversation in these platforms and people feeling as if they have this artificial power, that I'm saying this thing and people are listening. I have followers. I have likes.
Yeah.
I have shares. I have this. But to me, it's an artificial identity that people are leaning into because they don't have self-awareness, because they don't really know who who they really are. I see a lot of confusion in that conversation. I'm not saying every single person is confused. I'm saying the majority of the stories that I personally see on social media, and I'm not on social media that often, so my view is narrow, that there's a lot of confusion within their identity of who they are. It takes me to people that will identify with their illness.
Yeah.
And it goes into play and hand in hand with the victim mentality. Oh, I have this illness, so therefore I'm a victim of life, and people need to treat me differently because I am this illness. I am this illness. And I certainly don't want it to make it sound like I'm speaking for people that have an illness that I would never understand or even have never ever experienced. Where I'm coming from in this space is for the people that identify with something outside of them as who they are, this artificial identification, to just to notice that. What are you really identifying with, and why are you identifying with it? Is it the attention that you get? Is it because your voice is being heard amongst all the noise because you have a lot of followers? There's such a disconnect within the self, in my opinion. Again, I'm not an expert. It's just my observation.
Well, what is an expert? Let's just even start with that, right?
Yeah.
These days, everyone is an expert,
Well.
which means no one's an expert.
Yes.
because everything is relative. So if everyone's an expert, then we have to find the non-experts to validate how expert this expert actually is. And if everyone's an expert,
right,
there's no one's an expert.
right.
What you're kind of getting at here is, first of all, it's a great example of how we as human beings often get trapped in talking about the topics and not getting to the source, right? Whether we're talking about, people's views one way or another on the transgender issue, or one way or another on any other issue that is going on right now. Those are just topic conversations, because if you go under them, they all have the same source. And that source is the people feel powerless. Now, they may not be conscious of this, but there's only one reason why I would go outside of myself and try to get someone else to agree with me, try to get someone else to see my perspective and argue vociferously and even fight them for it. There's only one reason, is that if I was lacking something inside, power-wise. So I have to go out and get you to agree with me, to validate me, and now I feel powerful, right? Yeah. So again, it comes back to this whole power conversation. Now, the greatest powerless state that all human beings experience and few master is one where the ego is running the show. And when I talk about ego, I'm talking about identity. So all of us have an ego. I don't believe that unless you're willing to go and sit in a temple or somewhere and completely ostracize yourself from society and separate yourself from society, that you can ever get to this state of non-identity, right? Whenever you say I am or I am not, you're making a declarative statement that separates and distinguishes you from someone else. So if I say I am hungry, I am distinguishing myself from September. So there's a separation there, right? And you could say I'm hurt, I am upset, I'm happy, I'm whatever, right? It doesn't matter. So we all have an ego identity, and that identity separates us by definition from someone else. So there's nothing inherently wrong with that. That's just how we find ourselves in this world. We relate to ourselves as different entities, different people. And so it's not about getting rid of the ego. It's about bringing mastery around the ego so that it is not running you. And whenever we feel that we need to go outside of ourselves to get power through validation or through making someone else small or through making someone else have to agree with us or fighting someone. Like all a war is two egos of two groups fighting one another for power. That's it. Now, the error in the thinking is that the power is never from without, it's always from within. I don't need to go fight someone else or get someone else to agree with me or persuade someone else or get someone to validate me and tell me how great I am to feel powerful. I have the ability to feel powerful when I'm emotionally sober right now from within myself. I can do it on my own. No one has to be around and I don't need anything for it. Right. But that takes training and it takes a certain level of awareness. And so if people don't do that work, then they're going to remain in a state of powerlessness, which is just another way of saying they're going to remain a victim.
Yes. Yes. Such a common thread, the victim conversation. Why do you think it's so important now? I just don't remember it that way in the 80s and 90s. I just don't remember that being so predominant. Given
Yeah.
we have, social media that really helps us become aware of other layers of what's going on in life. And it does give people a voice. And there are no boundaries around it. There's no regulations. There's no there's no rules around it. It's just be who you are and be your unique self. That's the message that I grew up in the 90s. Be yourself, be unique. Don't try to be like everybody else. Well, holy shit, I think we've taken it to the extreme of
We have, but it's weird. We're simultaneously wanting to be a unique individual while also trying to persuade other unique individuals to agree with us.
yes, yes, yes,
So
that
it's
part.
almost like crazy making, right?
It
We
does feel
either
that way.
agree that everyone should have their own unique individual point of view and we honor that,
Yes.
or we want everyone to agree with us, which
No.
means they don't have their own unique point of view. So which is it?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I want to know what's different about you, Chad, and I want to celebrate those things. I don't need to be convinced that that's who you are. I'm not looking to be convinced of anything. I just want to I want to know what's different about you because I want to know you and celebrate the differences that we have. We talked about this before, different cultures, embracing other culture practices or um, fashion, for example. To me, that's a celebration of that culture. It has
Yeah,
nothing to do with I'm
sure.
taking over, I'm trying to be that. It's a celebration of this is what makes your culture unique. And I
Mm,
love that about your culture. And I want to embrace that too, because I want to celebrate that that is something that exists and something that we can occupy the same space in.
yeah.
It's I think you may have even heard the conversation of back in the day, not so long ago, that if a man said that he was a woman, he was put into a mental institution and they would work on the mental illness of this individual. But now it's so acceptable that that conversation is not a mental illness. That or is it that they're participating in the trend of the conversation because they want to feel like they're a part of something or that they want to be a part of a group? And that goes back to your point of, well, we do need to be individuals and celebrate our uniquenesses. And at the same time, we want to be accepted in a group of people that are like us, but that are different than us at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that without the self-awareness, without doing the work to know who you are, without any other program or other person's judgment or opinion of who you are, but really discovering who am I to me? Not who am I to that person or that group or this society or that, but who am I to me? I can speak from my own experience that as I dove into that conversation for myself, that my need to have people agree with me or to validate me becomes less and less. I
Mm-hmm.
validate myself. I know who I am, and I'm comfortable with who I am, and I'm happy with, and I'm proud of the person that I've discovered within me without all the bullshit from everybody else. The mom, the dad, the brother, the classmates in middle school, which are brutal, by the way.
Mm.
Middle school kids are brutal. I think a lot of us have experienced that. We were either the bully or we were either being bullied. You know, there was no middle ground. You had to pick a side. You were either being bullied or you were the bully. Um, and 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 having that self-awareness and the emotional sobriety. The emotional sobriety is so key. And we've talked about emotional sobriety on here, and you and I have had a lot of conversations at length around emotional sobriety, because as I stated before, it's really one of those lessons that we work on through TMIC that I that one that one just feels so big. There's so many facets to it. There's so many
Mm.
different ways to apply it. There's so many different ways of being aware of emotional sobriety. Can you summarize and simplify for those that don't know what emotional sobriety is? Because I'm still learning it.
Yeah.
And knowing you, I know that you would say, well, I'm also still learning it. But you have a lot more experience in this area. How would you describe this emotional sobriety, and how can people start relating to emotional sobriety for themselves?
Well, you've said a lot, and I want to comment on a couple things too, because, and then I'll get back to emotional sobriety because it relates. Coming back to, just because it's a hot topic right now, the transgender thing that you were talking about. It's important, first of all, what is considered a mental illness today is different than what was considered a mental illness years ago.
Totally
So
agree.
what is considered normal is a bell curve,
Mhm.
right? And that bell curve, bell curve, right? So
Yes.
the population, the normal part of the population, and I put that in air quotes, is the bulk of the bell curve. And then you have, the tapered parts, which are like the fringe of society. And that has always been a moving target. So what is normal today is not what is normal 20 years ago, or 20 years before that, or 20 years before that. I mean, let's face it. Most of society would be absolutely considered and deemed crazy and mentally ill and insane today if we were to be dropped into, the 1850s. I mean, they would just think we're nuts, right? On so many levels. Um, I mean, there
Can
was
you
this period of time where women who, because women were just property, and were just meant to, be, have children,
barefoot
and
and pregnant in the kitchen?
right.
Yes.
And so there was this point in time where some women were deemed crazy, and we called them hysterical. And the whole backdrop of hysteria is that, no, these women actually just had really high sex drives, and they wanted to have more sex, and they weren't allowed to in their society because that wasn't normal. And so they were crazy.
Yes.
Why would a woman want to have sex? She's insane. She's hysterical. We've got to do something about this, right? So what's considered insane or crazy or abnormal or whatever, is always an ever moving target. So coming back to the transgender thing, I won't speak to what's under that, except that the explosion of it
Yeah.
in the recent years seems to me, I think there's always been people throughout all of history where this has probably been a legit thing, and it's been a very small minority subset of the population. The explosion of it that has occurred in the last few years feels a bit faddish to me. It just feels that way because it's just come out of nowhere. But that's not even the point. And again, this is what I was saying earlier about how we make the error of focusing on the topic. The most important thing, whether someone is legitimately transgender or not, I'm not even going to get into the speculation of that. What I'm interested in is that person tapped into their own personal power, or are they doing this to gain attention or validation? Some people, it might be legitimate. Others, it's just for attention and validation. They have to work that out on their own in terms of where that's coming from. And that goes with not just transgender type topics, it goes with every human experience. So coming back to your emotional sobriety question, because it's directly linked to whether I'm a victim and whether I have power. When I'm emotionally sober, by definition, I am not operating from unconscious habit. I am fully conscious and present, and I am by design making every single choice. And it is coming from a place inside of me where I am able to be a response to life, not an unconscious reaction to life. When I'm emotionally sober, I'm not chasing an emotional state. I am accepting the state that I find myself in from moment to moment to moment. Emotions are there as a wise guide to let us know if we are living our lives from a place of power and alignment for us, right? So whatever is authentic and true and integral for me, I need to stay connected to that. And my emotions tell me when I'm not. So whenever I'm having an emotion that I would call, we call negative emotions, whenever I'm feeling depressed, whenever I'm feeling sad, whenever I'm, angry or whatever, right? These so-called negative emotions. That's the wisdom of our emotions are trying to tell us in that moment, something in your life, something at this moment, something in this circumstance, or something within you. This is where the awareness comes in, is out of alignment for who you authentically are, right? Instead of going into that and looking into that and trying to discern what it is so that we can course correct and get back into alignment with our authentic self, most people simply lash out and react to every one and every circumstance outside of themselves. And that's what we see on the planet generally right now is, it's like we were talking about earlier, people simultaneously want to be individuals and they also want people to be like them. Why would they want them to be like them and agree with them? Because they want to feel validated. Why do they want to feel validated? Because they don't have their own personal power, so they need to get it from outside of themselves. How do they get it? Through validation. People saying, you're amazing, you're great, you're this, you're right. Why we agree with you, right? That's power. I'm just bringing it in. If you don't agree with me, I'm going to get angry and react and lash out because I'm going to come take the power from you. So that's what a fight is, or a war. I'm taking power back from you. And so emotional sobriety is recognizing that the power is coming from within you. You don't need to get it from outside. And so when you don't need to get it outside, there are very few things that will make you angry. There are very few things that, because your alignment is internal, you're focused inside. There are very few things that will make you upset or sad or depressed. Someone dies in your family, you might feel sad about that because it feels incongruent and out of alignment to not have that person in your life anymore. But that happens for a time, and then the emotions kind of work themselves out and you accept the new normal and you move on. Those things will always happen. But I'm talking about the day-to-day stuff where people are constantly arguing, constantly debating, constantly fighting, constantly trying to get someone else to be like them, do like them, agree with them. And I think that social media, you had asked earlier, what's different about today? It's that before social media, we kind of lived in our own cultural bubbles within your town, within your city. Maybe you knew people in another city, but let's face it, in order to know them, you would have probably had to travel there, be introduced to them, meet them in a restaurant. Like there had to be some kind of organic meeting that connected you. There was no way for you to find someone on the other side of the country and go through almost like a dating checklist, like, oh, this, you go on their Facebook or their Instagram or their TikTok or whatever. Oh, this is their profile. And now you can't trust it anyway, right? Whatever they're saying, is it even true? So So all of a sudden, through the window of our phone, we have the entire country and world, quite frankly, at our fingertips. All these different people who believe all these different things, who are all simultaneously chattering about trying to convince others to agree with them. We're all nattering at each other, trying to get each other to agree with each other, you know? And so it's just a lot, it's a cacophony of noise. And it's leaving us not feel more empowered, but less empowered. That's the irony of it. The technology has created more potential power for us to actually for self-expression. But because we have paired our self-expression with the need for others to agree with what gets expressed, the heart of that is a lack of emotional sobriety. We're chasing an emotional state. We're chasing validation. We're operating from unconscious habit of wanting to be seen, getting our power from outside of us, wanting to dominate other people's views, other people's perspectives. And it's just created this situation that we find ourselves in right now.
Very messy.
Yeah. So what do we do about it? Just in closing, and it's a bigger conversation,
Yeah.
but emotional sobriety is the key, because when we're operating from a place of non-habituated unconscious conditioning, so we're operating from a place of conscious choice, when we're operating from a place where we can be a response to things, meaning it's measured, it's thoughtful, it's careful, it's considered, it's not a snap reactive thing that we just do. When we can operate from that place, we find that there's very little for us to do a lot of the time. There's very little for us to have to say. We don't need other people's validation. We don't need them to agree with us. And so, this whole, like any kind of movement is an egotistical situation where we're trying to get others to agree with us. And the real power is when you need no one to agree with you and you can firmly stand in your belief and you just carry on and you just do it because you don't need anything from anyone.
Can you imagine what the world would be like if our political leaders lived from that place?
Oh, all of us. I mean,
Well, I mean,
it's
like a business, though, it starts at the top.
mm,
And our government is a business. It's a
yeah,
business at the end of the day. And
yeah,
whether we like it or not, those are our leaders.
yeah,
Whether we like them or don't like them, they are leading the societies that we live in.
yeah.
And it starts at the top. And the crazy shit that goes on at the top just seems to be seeping more and more down into communities and society. But to be able to live from that place, do you think there'll ever be a time when we have our political leaders and governments and leaders of countries, do you think that there will be a time where the generation will surface that is more self-aware and does live from that place of, I know my power and I don't have anything to prove to anybody, and I'm not here to try to take something from you?
I mean, it hasn't happened yet, obviously, in human history. I don't think that means it can't. I think we're in the midst of a global societal temper tantrum right now, where everyone is operating from ego, meaning everyone is concerned with protecting their identity at all costs and getting others to agree that their identity is the right identity. That's why, on the bringing it back to the transgender situation, which is just a microcosm, it's identity politics, right? I'm transgender, or I'm gay, or I'm Christian, or I'm Muslim, or I'm conservative, or I'm liberal. Like, these are all identities.
Yes.
And and the reason we form identities is so that we can find, the idea here is that if I declare my identity, then it's like I'm part of a team, like it's my jersey or something, right? And then others who are wearing that identity, we can find each other and we can form community, because humans are predisposed to want to be in community together. There's nothing wrong with that to a certain degree. Like I said, we're never going to get rid of our ego, our identity. It's about mastering it. The key is not trying to get someone from the other team to have to wear my jersey. It doesn't matter. Let them do their own thing.
Yes.
like there's a live and let live sort
Oh,
of thing. At
yes.
least that's my philosophy,
Totally
um,
agree.
to live, just live and let live, let people, and you said it earlier, like, we don't all have to be the same. If you're different, then let me celebrate your differences,
Yes.
or not. If for whatever reason I find that the way that you're different doesn't, jive with me, then so what? Emotional sobriety says just let them be, live and let live. They're them, you're you, move on.
At
That's
the
it.
very least, have respect that, oh, we're just different.
We're
And
just
this,
different.
yeah.
We're all operating from a perceptual filter. We teach in TMIC that perception is reality.
Mhm.
What reason we teach that is so we can learn to have compassion, because that's the purpose of teaching that whole thing is actually about compassion. When you realize that you're only seeing the world through the limited perceptual lens that you have, which I won't go into what all of that is and what contributes to creating it, and someone else has the perceptual lens that they have. When you realize that that's what's at work, and that there is no way any human being can tap into objective reality, there's no way, it's impossible. None of us can. There is an objective reality. None of us know what it is, because we're always approaching it through the filtered lens of our perception. So when we realize that, what the purpose of that is supposed to do is supposed to have us go, oh, wow, they're also limited by their perceptual filter. So now I have compassion for why they did what they did or said what they said or where they're coming from. It may not even be them. It may be that they don't have emotional sobriety, so they're reacting to their perception of what's gone on. See, these things kind of stack. If you don't have emotional sobriety and you mistake that what you experience as reality is actual reality, and it's not just your view or perception of it, then you get kind of the trajectory we're on as a society right now. And I think all of this non-emotional sobriety and all of this trying to convince everyone to be like each other is eventually going to burn out in some cataclysmic breakdown, a systemic breakdown. I probably, I don't see how we avoid it, quite frankly. I mean, we have 8 billion people today. We only had roughly 4 billion people on the planet in the 1960s. So we had half as many people. And we couldn't, through the awakening movements and everything that happened in the 60s and 70s, that didn't make a difference, so we have twice as many people. So I think we're approaching some kind of a systemic breakdown. And it's kind of like, my daughter, she used to have, like all kids, they have like temper tantrums,
Yes.
And so I used to go in the bedroom when she was having a temper tantrum, and I used to hug her really, just hold her. And I'd hug her so she was facing the other way so she couldn't hit my head, right? She was having a temper tantrum. But I would just hold her, and she would just, she would just fight and scream and yell. And eventually she would run out of energy, and she just, oh, that was it. The tantrum was over. And then we could have a conversation about it, right? But it was normal for her. And I didn't really have the awareness I do now back then. But looking back on it, I have compassion for her. As a child, it was normal for her, because people have temper tantrums when they feel at a loss of power. Why was she having a temper tantrum? She got in trouble for something. She was sent to her room. Loss of power, loss of rights, loss of privilege. Now you're stuck in the room. Temper tantrum, right? Loss of power leads to temper tantrum. We're seeing these temper tantrums happening through all the crap online, social media, wars. All of these are just temper tantrums. They come from the same root, right? Of a sense of a loss of power.
Yeah.
And eventually the temper tantrum burns itself out. The systems break down, and we all get to take a breather and have a conversation.
Yes.
And there's a sobriety that rushes in that moment, and we're like, what the hell was wrong with us? It's almost like we're in a trance or something like that,
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes. That reminds me of, my son's also typical age stuff that I would gently pick up. Preston, my youngest one, was the one who I had to, he had tantrums. My oldest son didn't. But when Preston started around age 2 or 3, I would just pick him up, take him to a bedroom and set him on the bed and say, when you're finished and you're done, you can come out, let me know that you're finished and we'll talk.
Yeah.
Screaming all the way, screaming, I'll just shut the door. And then suddenly it would get quiet and he would say, I'm done, mommy. And he'd come out and we'd just talk. What happened? It would be wonderful if we could send some people to their rooms.
Yeah,
Just
I know.
cry it out, scream it out. And when you're done, let's have a conversation. That would be awesome. That would be awesome to do.
Well, I've said it for so many years now. Unfortunately, because we have not taught the things that we teach in TMIC en masse, which we
Yes.
would love to get these teachings into schools and
Oh
places
my
like that
gosh.
to help people develop a sense of power early on in life. But the world is run by emotional teenagers at best,
Yes.
at best,
Yes.
you know, and it's sad that we have emotional teenagers who have armies and nuclear warheads at their disposal because it sounds trite and I don't mean it to be trite, but if you understand the source or the essence of what I'm saying, that the very same mechanism that causes a kindergartner to throw sand at another kindergartner's face when they feel a loss of power around something is the same source that causes someone to send an army against another country. It's the very same mechanism. You're just talking about a difference in scale, but it's the same mechanism, no different. And so because we have not worked this out of the human condition, we're dealing with war and we're dealing with all this other stuff. And until we get that handled, don't expect anything to change.
No. And there's so many innocent people being caught in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Disposable. That's how they see their.
Yeah. It's tragic. Yeah. Yeah.
Heartbreaking.
And incidentally, though, what I'll also say is those people are innocent, but they're also responsible. And what do I mean by that? Is that all of us are responsible for what happens in our society. Now, we may not on an individual level have the same power as, say, the leader in government who's controlling the army, but collectively, we have a lot of power. And so you see, it's actually this individualism, and I'm not making individualism wrong. I think individualism on the creative plane is brilliant. Creatively, we should be able to individually express ourselves, right? But in terms of how we organize ourselves as a society, that is a collective activity. You cannot have a fully functioning society of individuals who are warring with each other about their perception of how something's supposed to go down. A house divided will fall. And so individually, we want to be self-expressed, but collectively, we need to come together and determine what are our values and what do we want to create as a society. And so that's what I'm saying, that the people who are caught in the middle of these different wars around the world, yes, they may be innocent in the sense that they're in the middle of the egos of the two leading leaders who are controlling the armies. But how did those leaders get in power? Even if they weren't elected, let's say it's not a democracy and it's a totalitarian or authoritarian government, how many totalitarian and authoritarian governments throughout history have been brought to their knees when the people collectively got together and finally said, enough is enough, we're not dealing with this anymore, right? So we know that works. And it's always this sort of ramp up where things have to get so bad before people finally come together and collectively say enough.
Yeah.
And I'm like, let's just do that really early on,
Well,
so it doesn't have to get so bad.
but I mean, you can look at relationships. People will stay in horrible relationships until it just gets so bad they can't take it anymore. I think our resilience to things like that. I think as a collective, humans are very forgiving. Oh, it's okay. Make excuse. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It has to be super bad for change to happen often, that people have to be pushed to just unbearable amounts of pain before they're willing to make a change. And we can see that with listen, people, you use this example all the time, is that people who have heart attacks, less than 10% of them will change their lifestyle to
Yeah.
prevent another one.
Yeah.
But that's not bad. A heart attack's not bad enough to make a lifestyle change.
Right.
So what is it really going to take for people to come together?
Well, it's not resilience. Let's be clear that people will say they're resilient, but what's under the smokescreen of I'm resilient is I'm terrified of change.
Yeah.
I'm terrified of the devil I know is better than the devil I don't. This is what keeps people trapped, right?
That's
So
it.
people are terrified of the perceived pain associated with change. Quick example, if I'm flying coach and the stewardess comes up and says, hey, we have a business class that's just opened up. Would you like to change seats? There's no perceived pain associated with that change. Only pleasure, in fact.
Yes.
I get warm almonds and I get a glass of wine and I get a blanket and I have a bigger seat,
Yeah.
right? That's a change, but there's no perceived pain. So it's not resilience. It's not that people are resilient. I mean, yeah, human beings are absolutely adaptable. We will adapt to the worst conditions. But the reason we choose to adapt, and it is a choice, is because we would rather adapt than go through the effort that it's going to require to bring change about. The heart attack patients you mentioned as an example, it is easier for them to accept the near certainty of their having a recurring heart attack or dying within 5 years. It is easier for them to accept that than for them to accept the pain of the change they're going to have to deal with, the pain of changing their diet, the pain of starting to exercise. I mean, I remember when I was first starting to run regularly again years ago now, and I would go out. First of all, it would only be a 1 mile run, and I would have to stop. I'd run for a little bit, and then I'd have to walk, catch my breath, run for. A mile took me forever. Now, I mean, I'm running. I don't know, 7.5 or 8 miles an hour. I'm doing 5 mile runs in 35 minutes. And I do it effort, I wouldn't say effortlessly. There's effort, but it doesn't feel painful anymore, I guess. Right. So, but I was willing to go through that. And, but this is the problem, is that human beings, generally speaking, I think it's 2% or less of the population are able to lean in to the pain that is required to bring any level of change or transformation to themselves or to their condition, right? It's very small percentage. So that's the thing. It's not that humans are so resilient. I mean, I guess you could look at it that way from one perspective and say they are, but what's under why are they resilient sitting in a war-torn country? Why would you want to tolerate that? Well, the only reason you'd want to tolerate that is if your perception is that the change is going to be far more painful than what I'm dealing with right now. And until that scale gets tipped in the other direction, people just are bystanders to this, and victims. They're powerless, but they choose to be victims because I'm telling you, listen, if the entire country of Russia stood up today and said, we are no longer going to deal with this shit, we are not invading Ukraine. There's like 150 million people in that country. They don't have a military that could handle 150 million people standing up and saying, we're done and we're marching on. That's how coups happen, right? So the people have the real power. But when people are separated and they've been taught to only the individual values matter, only you as an individual matters, now you're separated and you're kept weak. It's when people come together. The civil rights movement in the United States is a perfect example. When Black people came together and said, enough is enough. And they bond together and they marched and they protested and they stood, and you can't stop that force. You cannot stop that force. So we're responsible for what's going on because we're sitting as individuals on the sideline believing we're powerless, and we're not.
In closing, what would you say? Where's the a good place for people to start around emotional sobriety?
Where would they start?
New conversation, foreign concept, emotional sobriety. First time I'm hearing it. How the heck do I even start to embrace that? Where do I start to learn?
Well, yeah. So I think one of the best places to start is to take a step back in your life and to look at all of the areas in your life where you are complaining about something. And it's little things sometimes, like we don't even realize we're complaining sometimes. It just kind of flies out of our mouth and then we move on to the next thing, right? Like, so wherever we're complaining, there's something about the thing we're complaining about that doesn't align with us. And we're having an emotional reaction to it. That's what a complaint is, right? And so that alone will start to give you some insight into how emotionally unsober you are. Because if you were emotionally sober, you would experience it, but you'd process it, there'd be no complaint. And then you would lean into it and go, well, why did I have this inclination to complain? What is it about this thing that bothers me? And you would discover, oh, this thing is something I don't enjoy. It's something I don't appreciate. And then you ask the question, well, why am I doing it then? Well, I'm doing it because someone told me to, or I'm doing it because if I do it, then I'll get attention. Oh, so now you're living your life for other people. See, under the complaint is the source of why we do the things that we do. And usually the reason that we do the things that we do are to avoid discomfort, to avoid effort, or to gain validation from other people. Those are usually the three motivations. And so if you want personal power, you want to do things because you want to do it, not because someone else expects you to, or because you're going to get the attention from them. You just want to do it because you want to do it. That's self-expression. You do things, even though it takes effort, you lean into the effort, you alter the way you relate to effort. And you actually see that in all of life, the things where we felt most alive, the times when we felt most alive is when we've had to put effort into something and we've overcome and we've triumphed and we've created something. It's only, look at, you're never going to remember that minute or that 5 minutes or that hour on October, 19th, 2021, when you were laying on the couch watching Netflix. You're not remembering that minute. You're not remembering that show. You can't remember that. It's gone. Why? It was meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
But you definitely remember your achievements. You definitely remember where you put effort into something and you've overcame something because you were present, you were focused, and you were doing it for you. And it was a triumph of your own will, talking about power, right? So anyway, I think is where people start with emotional sobriety is just take a step back and just observe how much you're complaining and what you're complaining about, and start to realize that all of these times that you're experiencing quote unquote negative emotions, usually a complaint follows them incidentally, whether it's just in our own head or we vocalize it. That those are places where you have a loss of power. And those are places where your emotions are trying to show you something. And what they're trying to show you is this thing is out of alignment with who you are, and you shouldn't be doing it. And incidentally, that's the crux of what we spend a lot of our time really digging into and getting to the heart of in the TMIC whole life architecture workshops. So
really good. Thank you. It's a good place.
Well, that was a long one, but it was good.
It was good. Yes.
I appreciate everybody joining us for this episode, not edition. And we will see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us.
That concludes this episode of The Most Important Conversations. This in-depth conversation could set you on the path to self-improvement, which is essential if you want to be an effective leader and take meaningful action in your life. If you enjoyed this episode and want more of these stimulating discussions, you can find them at tmicglobal.com. Remember, the world is at a crossroads right now. You can't afford to waste this opportunity to take charge of your life, build meaningful relationships with others, and co-create a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.